When creating our images inside the grid, we had the option to create variations of these images. We did that here when we created this grid here based on an earlier image. And if we have a look at our prompt, which is added right here, afterwards we have this variations subtile, let's call it command, added right here. And if we look at our upscaled image now, we can do the same thing for such isolated images. We can create strong variations, subtile variations, or region-specific variations, which we'll cover in a few seconds. If we create a strong variation and maybe a subtile variation first, we should see the differences between these two variation types. So let's now compare the initial image with the two variations that we created. The left one is the upscaled image and the right one is the subtile variation. And the images look basically the same, I would say. We have some differences regarding the direction of the trees. The water looks a bit different, but no big differences can be found here in my opinion. Things are a bit different if we look at the strong variation here. Obviously, the core image still remains the same, but for example, the first three images are flipped now, so we have the trees to the right. This image here has an additional island, same thing applies to this image here, and also here in the background we see the island being increased. So generally, we have stronger changes when comparing it to the subtile variation. As mentioned, the underlying image obviously remains the same, so the core look of the image doesn't change, but more things are edited, are changed in this image with the strong variation. This obviously also depends on the image type you use, so depending on the upscaled image, changes, variations might become more significant than we see it right here. So vary here describes the amount of variations that we want to apply to our image. Vary region here is a bit more explicit, because with vary region, we can use either this rectangle tool to select specific parts in our image, or undo this and select this tool here to draw our own areas individually, like this maybe. And now, hopefully, this part of the image should be varied, should be changed. So in our case, the tree type should change. Let's see if this works by hitting submit here. Now at the bottom, a new image generation process is initiated. And indeed, we see that the selected part, so our palm trees here, changed. The other parts of the image remained unchanged in our grid here. So these vary options here allow you to change either the entire image or just specific part of an upscaled image that you created. The remaining options are a bit more straightforward actually. The zoom out option, either 2 times or 1.5 times, zooms out of the existing image. You can also define a custom zoom over here. In here, we cannot define our zoom via so-called parameters. So parameters are always indicated by these double dashes. So this is the aspect ratio we could change. This right here is the zoom. I'll not dive into parameters at this point though, because these will be covered in a lot of detail in the next course module. But here, if you change this parameter, you can, for example, add a zoom level of 1.3 here and submit this. Then you got this custom zoom level added, which you can see right here in your prompt. And this zoom level for the custom zoom has to be between 1 and 2, so values of 3, 4, etc. won't work. And now if we see our newly created grids, you see this is zoomed out by a factor of 2. This is zoomed out a bit less by a factor of 1.3 only. And now we could simply take our fourth image here and upscale this. And now apply one of these arrows here. these arrows will simply increase the image size. So it will not change the zoom, but instead, if I click onto this right arrow here, for example, this now creates a new grid with 4 images where the viewing angle will be increased to the right of the image by adding new AI-generated content. And if we look at the result now, I think this doesn't look too bad actually. If you look at this image, for example, Midjourney now simply added another beach here to our image. And this now also works to the left, to the top, and to the bottom, depending on the requirements for your specific image. The last 2 options will be covered in a few minutes in this module, but at this point we are done with the core features that we need to know about when it comes to creating images in Midjourney. As a next step, I want to dive a bit deeper into the settings of Midjourney and how these impact the way our images are generated. The settings can again be accessed via a command, so we add another slash here and now type settings. We can select the option up here. And now inside the settings menu, there are plenty of options available. To make this a bit more structured and not too overwhelming, I want to exclude some options at this stage of the course. These options include the selection of the model. As you can see, Midjourney comes with different models. Just using the latest default model, 5.2 in my case, is totally fine to get started. We'll have a closer look at Midjourney models and the differences in the next course module. Same thing applies to this raw mode and remix mode options, which we'll also skip for the moment. Generally, using the default settings in Midjourney is totally fine. So in case you played around here and want to go back to the default ones, you can always reset your settings down here. Next to this reset button, you can find different modes: relax, fast mode, and turbo mode. The default mode is the fast mode. And if we again go back to the official documentation with the pricing, here inside the plans, we can find a dedicated amount of fast GPU time depending on the plan you are using. When using fast mode, which is the default mode, creating an image takes about 1 minute and consumes round about 1 minute also from your available fast GPU time of the specific month. If you change to turbo mode, consumption will double, so instead of using 1 minute of your time, it will consume 2 minutes, but at the same time, creating an image will only take around about 15 seconds. So that's the core difference between this fast and turbo mode. Turbo is faster, but takes about twice the amount of your fast GPU time, and if you run out of your fast GPU time, you will automatically switch to the relaxed GPU time for the standard plan and above. For the basic plan, you won't be able to create any new images, so you will have to purchase extra GPU time. So this is what this whole mode thing down here is all about. Variation mode is something we explored already when we had a look at the options we have for upscaled images. So very strong and very subtle for the upscaled image is the same thing you can set in your settings with low and high variation mode for the general variation options that you have once you initially created your grid. So when using these variation options, either high or low variations of the initial images will be created depending on your setting here. So variation mode is basically the vary option for entire grid, so to say. And finally, we have this stylize option here, which is set to medium by default. And to make things a bit more interesting, I'll now set stylize to low first, and now add a new prompt. I want to have a cute dog wearing a hat and sunglasses. So this is the stylize low version now, which is again added as parameter to our prompt. And now I can simply go to my options once again and set stylize to very high. And if I now change the option and regenerate this image, it will still use the stylize low option because our regeneration is still based on this initial prompt and therefore also on these initial settings. So in this case, regenerate won't work. So instead, in this case, I have to copy paste my prompt, which I can do now. So now I'll run this again. And this time you see we have this stylize 750 parameter. Here in this case we had stylize 50. This was the low stylize level. And I think with this example, the impact of the stylize option becomes quite obvious. The lower the stylize value, the closer Midjourney follows your prompt. So we simply have a dog wearing a hat and sunglasses. This hat is a bit more fancy, but besides that, we have a pretty simple background, simple hat, and simple sunglasses. But with the highly stylized option, we see this fancy hat in here. We have these flowers here also in the background. We have this very fancy hat also right here. We have these orange sunglasses. So the stylize option simply defines how much additional fluff, so to say, Midjourney adds around the initial prompt. So if you want to stay close to your prompt and don't want Midjourney to be too creative, so to say, you simply use the low or medium stylize option. If things should be a bit more crazy, you can go to stylize high or stylize very high. I'll simply go back to my initial settings here because I think the default settings are pretty fine for many use cases. So with that, if we once again open our settings to have these here at the bottom, we had a look at many options, but now I want to dive into this public mode here.